today. So we're asking that question. Do you agree with Work and Pension Secretary Mel Stride that concern about mental health has gone too far? He certainly had quite a lot of criticism over that one. And joining us now is Christopher Snowden, who's Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs. We'll talk to him in a second, but first of all, let's get the perspective of Lucy Beresford, who is a broadcaster and psychotherapist, because this really has been a big controversy since Mel Stride has said that.
I was shocked, actually. I couldn't believe that someone would, in a way, diminish the concerns and the issues that so many people face. Now, let's be clear, historically, and I'm talking, maybe over 200, 300 years, the medical profession have been very aware of what are known as malingerers, people who aren't as unwell as they present. And they might GP shop or hospital shop, and they go from hospital or clinician to hospital, just seeking diagnosis, seeking contact. That in itself might have some psychological dimension to it. But the idea that there are people out there who are pretending to be unwell or perhaps inflating the sense of how they feel I just don't think is a major problem.
Is it not possible that some people would be doing it without meaning to do it and actually saying, I feel worse than I do because of a mental health condition? Is that
I think feelings is a very subjective thing, and you need to be able to
But this is the point, isn't it, about mental health?
Yes, exactly. And therefore, one person's truth is very important for them. And my role is very much around trying to work out what someone's truth is and how much of that is actually accurate. But I think what might be being talked about is the use of language here. We have people who might say, oh, I feel so depressed. Well, clinical depression is a very serious condition. You need to have to have had it for at least 2 weeks to obtain that diagnosis. And therefore, maybe we're being a little bit too flaky or fluid with our language, that actually when we hear these words and we think, oh yeah, maybe that relates to me. And you can't live on a permanent upward trajectory in life. You are going to have off days. You are going to have what people laughingly call bad hair days, which of course you have and I have all the time. But there are, quite seriously, there are people who will have a situation where they think that they have something wrong with them. And now we have the language to be able to go to a clinician or to even go to your employer and say, this is what I'm struggling with. It's no longer taboo to talk about it. And that's a really good thing.
Well, let's bring in Christopher Snowden, who's been waiting patiently. Christopher, isn't it good that we are actually having this conversation now? We're talking about mental health, and we're actually saying to bosses, I can't come to work today because I have a mental health condition, perhaps clinically diagnosed, in the sense that even 20 years ago, that would have been impossible for many people.
Yeah, sure it is. But, we do little else but talk about mental health these days. I mean, what Mel Stride's talking about really is the economics of a situation in which the spectrum of mental health is extremely broad, and you can have something like anxiety or depression at a softer or much harder end. And clearly there are people, even with something like generalized anxiety disorder, who will be genuinely unable to hold down a job. But then there'll be a lot of people who it's not really a disability. They shouldn't be on disability living allowance. And as Mel Stride said, perhaps slightly controversially, but saying what a lot of people are thinking, these people would actually feel a lot better if they were at work.
What is better for your mental health, to be in work or not in work, Lucy?
There are a lot of benefits from being in work. Yeah, the socialization, the sense of self-esteem, sense of achievement, routine and structure, all sorts of ways in which work really helps. What is really interesting to me is that some research came out only a month or so ago from YouGov that showed that for Generation Z, 18 to 29-year-olds, they were happier in lockdown. They don't like the workplace as much as other people have been led to believe. And I think what that might speak to is the fact that the workplace can be very intimidating. It can mean that you're having to interact with people that you don't like or you don't respect.
But isn't that just part of life?
It is part of life. But I think nowadays, the interesting thing is that we have different choices. That whereas again, maybe 100 years ago, our life and work opportunities were completely different. Now, you can work from home. If you're a female, you can have a much better career than you might have had maybe a generation or two ago. That actually the world of work has shifted. And what we need to accommodate is the fact that also our understanding about mental health has also shifted. And that for some people who may actually have interrelational problems, for example, being in a workplace or being set certain tasks is just actually really difficult. They might need to have a very different type of work, but to say we've got to stick with this just because we don't think you've got a mental health problem is surely regressive.
Is that what Mel Stride is actually saying, do you think, Christopher? Do you think that's really that he's getting at people with mental health issues, or is he just saying, actually, we need to tackle this problem more broadly?
I think what he's saying is there's been an extraordinary rise in the number of people who are off work with things like anxiety and depression, and that it's not very easy to explain such a large spike other than by understanding that these definitions have been stretched way beyond what they used to mean, and that because disability living allowance pays more than job seekers allowance, people are choosing to get signed off work. And 94% of people who go to the doctor with a claim about one of these mental health conditions get signed off for work. Why should the doctor care? The doctor's got no incentive to really test these people. The symptoms are totally self-reported anyway. And so this is costing businesses a lot of money, because you get businesses who, somebody signed off work and they can stay signed off for months and months. And it's costing the taxpayer a great deal of money. And I think he's quite right to say we need to do something about it. I'm not quite sure what. I'm sure all the mental health charities will find their most sympathetic cases and treat them as if they're absolutely typical. Okay. But there is a real issue here. I think most people can see that.
Sam has given us a call from Kent. Sam, what's your point on this? Thanks for giving us a ring on 0344 499 1000. Go ahead.
Hi, Peter.
Hiya.
I would imagine the first thing I'd have to say is that we need to stop conflating mental illness with mental health. They are separate. I mean,
well, everybody has mental health, but not everybody has mental illness.
Yeah, I have bipolar. I've been diagnosed for over 20 years, and I've been medicated for over 20 years. And generally, I'm in a pretty good place. I'd say maybe 20% of the time over the last 10 years, I've not been in a good place. And I know there has been this massive rise in people reported with mental illness. But we also have to understand that for about 3 years, mental health services pretty much shut down.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. That's behind the spike, really, isn't it, Lucy?
Yeah.
And Sam, does it annoy you as someone who is clinically diagnosed, who's clearly had, as you tell us, problems clinically for a long time? Does it annoy you when people talk almost casually about this, that maybe perhaps use imprecise language and so on?
It does, but I do try to be mindful of the fact I don't know what's going on in somebody else's life. I mean, I don't think mental illness it's there, it's part of your being, so it's going to affect you. It doesn't matter if you're successful or not. So I don't think you can project your own ideals onto it.
Sam, you've made some really good points there. Thank you very, very much indeed. That's Sam, who gives a ring on 0344 499 1000. You can do the same thing. I just want to read out a couple of texts, and then I'll perhaps get a quick final word from Christopher and Lucy. Russell says, it's too easy. It's a cop-out. Victoria says on text, no, help isn't readily available everywhere, and it is a bit of a postcode lottery still. I agree with you, Victoria. Mel says, yes, it has, but also people that really need support are not being looked after. Well, I've had mental health issues for about 15 years. I take pills every single day for it. I'm under the care of a psychiatrist. But I also think that I agree with Sam, actually, in terms of what he's saying, in that mental health and mental illness are two different things, Lucy.
Yeah. Well, as a former investment banker, I completely agree with Christopher that there is an economic impact. The problem is we've made so many strides in actually improving the mental health and well-being of so many of our people. Please let's not go back to the days where we demonize that kind of language.
Christopher, final word from you?
Well, apparently we haven't. Otherwise, there wouldn't be record numbers of people off work with mental health problems, however they may be defined.
Okay, thank you both very, very much indeed. That's Christopher Snowden there from the Institute of Economic Affairs. He's a lifestyle economics guru. And Lucy Beresford for a second time today. Thank you very much indeed. She is a broadcaster and a psychotherapist.